She walked into her dream job on a Monday morning and walked straight into the worst discovery of her life. Before she even set down her bag, before she even learned the Wi-Fi password, she saw her husband's face. Not a coincidence, not a mistake. In a silver picture frame, on the desk right next to hers, smiling beside a woman who had no idea she was looking at his wife. 7 years, a shared home, a shared life, and the entire time, he had been building another one, a different name, a different woman, a different wedding. But here's what Everett never calculated. He married the one woman smart enough, patient enough, and dangerous enough to walk back into that room and burn it all down in 4 minutes flat. Aurora Hill didn't scream. She didn't cry. She planned, because the most powerful move a betrayed woman can make is silence, until the moment it's time to speak. This story is a reminder that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep someone buries it. If this hit something inside you, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, because every week we bring you stories that remind you just how strong the human spirit really is. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and real emotional value.
My first day in Boston began with a photograph of my husband on a stranger's desk, and it wasn't even 9 in the morning. He was smiling in a private way I knew intimately. The woman, my new colleague, introduced him as her fiancé. I felt the scream rise and die in my throat. Instead, I smiled back, and in that silent exchange, I realized my marriage wasn't merely over. I had walked, completely unsuspecting, into the epicenter of a meticulously constructed lie, one he was certain I would never find. My name is Aurora Hill, and at 34, I was supposed to be starting over. Boston's Seaport District felt sharp and clean in the morning air as I stepped into the glass and steel lobby of Astor Vale Urban Systems, the architecture of my new life. Becoming Senior Reputation Director here was more than a promotion. It was the calm after a storm of professional instability. I'd promised myself this new office, with its sweeping harbor views and silent, plush carpeting, would be a fresh start. Straightening the lapels of my blazer, I felt the cool, familiar weight of professionalism settle on me. I was centered. I was ready. I had absolutely no idea that the life I'd curated with such precision was about to be utterly annihilated before I could even get my new email password. The open concept 12th floor hummed with a quiet, focused energy. My new workspace was a clean slate of polished wood and metal. The moment I placed my tote bag on the floor, the woman at the adjacent desk glanced up, her smile so brilliant it seemed to fight the sterile overhead lighting. "You have to be the new director," she chirped, her voice a bright, musical sound against the low thrum of the office. "I'm Delaney Brooks, partnership manager. It's so amazing to finally have someone next to me." Delaney couldn't have been more than in her late 20s, and she radiated a kind of polished, effortless warmth. It was a disarming, guileless charm that invited you to trust her instantly. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse, and her desk was a perfect extension of her, curated, alive, and intensely personal. A ceramic mug sat on a coaster, a healthy little succulent thrived in its pot, and an iced coffee was slowly weeping condensation onto a napkin. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Delaney," I said, extending a hand. "Aurora." "Oh, I know." She laughed, her grip firm and genuine. "This entire floor has been counting down the days until you started. We are in desperate need of your genius for the new PR campaigns." Her hand swept across her desk as she spoke, a casual gesture that pulled my eyes along with it. And then I saw him. Tucked between the succulent and her computer monitor was a heavy silver frame. It was angled toward her, a small private altar of happiness for her to glance at during the day. Inside was a high-quality print, washed in the golden light of a perfect afternoon. In the photo, Delaney was mid-laugh, head tilted back, arms wound around the neck of the man beside her. That man was looking straight into the lens, and the air vanished from my lungs. It wasn't a gasp. It was a complete, brutal shutdown of my respiratory system. The blood in my veins turned to ice, my fingers and toes going instantly numb. I knew the exact fleck of gold in those hazel eyes. I knew the subtle, imperfect way his smile tilted up on one side. I knew the precise way his hair fell when it was caught by the wind. It was Everett Sloane, my husband. The silence that fell between us couldn't have been longer than 3 seconds, but inside the vacuum of my shock, it stretched into a silent, screaming eternity. I willed my lungs to work, to pull in a single shallow breath. "That's a beautiful frame," I heard myself say. The voice of strangers, perfectly calm, smooth, and utterly detached from the tectonic plates shifting inside my chest. Delaney absolutely glowed, a blush of pure, unadulterated pride coloring her cheeks. "Oh, thank you. That's my fiancé, Everett." My heart hammered once, a sick, heavy blow against my ribs. Engaged. "Everett Stone," she corrected herself, her polished nail tracing the silver border. "He hates having his picture taken, but I finally got a great one of us." Everett Stone. He hadn't even had the decency to use a different first name. The raw, staggering audacity of it was like a physical slap. I leaned forward, feigning a closer look at the picture, my mind scanning the details with the cold precision of a crime scene analyst. I saw the watch on his wrist. It was a limited edition chronograph with a deep navy face. I knew its weight to the ounce because I had held it myself. I'd bought it for him on our 5th wedding anniversary, draining a significant portion of my own savings to do so. My gaze shifted past their joyful faces to the background. They stood on a wooden dock overlooking a still, pine-lined lake. The cabin just visible behind them had a uniquely pitched roofline. The floor fell out from under me. It was the rental in the Adirondacks. Everett and I had spent a weekend there just 14 months ago. I had a nearly identical photograph of him on that very same deck. The picture on Delaney's desk wasn't some random public photo. It was from an intimate trip he had either recreated for her or, far worse, had managed to overlap with our own. "He's very handsome," I murmured, my face frozen in a mask of polite interest. "Have you two been engaged for a while?" "Almost 3 years now." Delaney let out a happy sigh, her voice thick with contentment. "It feels like it's flown by. We got engaged right before Christmas last year. Now we're just buried in wedding planning. It's going to be an autumn ceremony." 3 years. The words ricocheted inside my skull. 3 years of late nights with clients, emergency business trips, and networking dinners he couldn't get out of. 3 years of him coming home to our bed, kissing my forehead as I slept, while he was meticulously constructing an entire second life with the woman who sat less than 30 inches away from me. "An autumn wedding sounds lovely," I managed, my voice perfectly calibrated for casual office chatter. "Have you picked a venue?" "Blackwell House," she said, her eyes shining. "It's on the coast, super private. Everett was insistent. He believes a marriage deserves a beginning that's completely removed from all the noise." Blackwell House, a historic estate whose deposit alone could finance a small car, a place that was booked solid for years. The irony of his reasoning was so bitter, it felt like poison on my tongue. A marriage starting away from the noise, orchestrated by the creator of the most catastrophic noise imaginable. I didn't knock the frame over. I didn't throw her iced coffee. I didn't shake her by the shoulders and demand to know how many nights she'd slept with my husband. Instead, I just nodded. I allowed a soft, appropriate smile to form. "That sounds absolutely perfect, Delaney. I'm so happy for you." "Thank you, Aurora," she said, smiling back, completely unaware she was speaking to a woman whose life had just been reduced to ash. "I think we're going to get along great." "I think so, too," I said quietly. Then I turned, sat in my own chair, and placed my hands flat on the cool desk. To anyone watching, I was the image of a poised executive, ready to begin her day. I opened the company's intranet. I fiddled with my monitor settings. But on the inside, the heartbroken wife was already gone, replaced by something colder, something harder. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a terrifying, diamond-hard clarity. Everett saw himself as a master builder, erecting two separate lives so perfectly that no one would ever see the seams. He believed he was invincible. As I stared into the blank monitor, I felt the cold, precise gears of a machine begin to turn inside me. I wasn't going to confront him tonight in a storm of tears and accusations. I was going to dismantle his fraudulent world, piece by fraudulent piece, and I was going to use his adoring fiancé to help me do it. At exactly 12:30, the communications team decamped to a pricey seafood restaurant on the waterfront for my welcome lunch. We sat at a long, sun-drenched table, the light bouncing off the water with an almost violent glare. The menu was a testament to coastal indulgence, but I ordered a plain tuna salad, knowing my stomach had seized into a tight, useless knot. The sound of expensive cutlery on plates and the drone of corporate pleasantries formed a bizarre soundtrack to the nightmare playing out in my head. Delaney sat directly across from me. Outside the contained quiet of the office, her personality seemed to expand, drawing the table's focus like a magnet. It didn't take much time for the topic to shift from business to her wedding plans. She spoke about the man she called Everett Stone with a kind of breathless devotion one usually finds in novels. To hear her tell it, he was the protagonist of a perfect love story. She sprinkled anecdotes about him throughout the conversation, complaining with a dramatic flair about his 80-hour work weeks spent closing monumental corporate deals. And yet, he never missed a single anniversary, she bragged. Always sent a cascade of white orchids after a tiff. Always booked the best corner table in town. I focused on the bitter bite of arugula on my tongue, the only honest thing in the room. It had been 4 years since my husband bought me flowers. Any mention of a new restaurant was met with a sigh and a complaint about his workload, followed by a suggestion for Thai takeout. Our big excitement was picking paint colors for the guest room. Delaney laughed, clinking the ice in her glass. Everett just got the keys to a place at the Charleston Wharf. He's gutting the entire thing before we move in. He's obsessed with this vision for a kitchen in charcoal and brass, the Wharf. Those were multi-million-dollar glass boxes hanging over the harbor, the kind of place you needed a background check just to see. I set my fork down with meticulous, deliberate care. Just 2 months prior, Everett and I sat at our own worn kitchen island, arguing over whether we could even afford a new water heater without dipping into our savings. He had looked right through me, lecturing on the need for fiscal responsibility in an unstable economy. "You are so lucky, Delaney," a junior copywriter named Chloe sighed. "My guy can barely text back, and you have a billionaire who designs kitchens. Let's see that ring again." Delaney blushed, a pretty pink flush rising up her neck as she held out her left hand. The diamond shattered the afternoon light into 1,000 tiny, blinding pieces. It was a flawless, colossal, emerald-cut stone, flanked by baguettes on a thick platinum band. It was a ring that wasn't a question, but a statement of ownership. Under the table, my own hand lay still. My thumb found the familiar smooth line of the simple gold band on my finger. 7 years ago, when Everett proposed, he gave me this. He'd spoken earnestly about despising the garish spectacle of the modern wedding industrial complex. He told me our love was the substance, that we didn't need a vulgar piece of jewelry to prove it. He'd sold me on the idea that this thin band represented a quiet, superior elegance. "It is stunning," Chloe breathed. I told him it was way too much, Delaney said, pulling her hand back with a small, self-satisfied smile. I honestly did, but Everett is just so stubborn. He said he hates showing off, but he always invests in what he believes is truly valuable. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, silencing the restaurant's murmur. I drank my water, the cold shock a welcome distraction. Invests in what is truly valuable. The words detonated in my mind, and with them, the cold, structural truth of my marriage was laid bare. Everett didn't hate luxury or extravagance. He wasn't a man of simple tastes. He just didn't think I was a valuable investment. He had been stockpiling his affection, his money, his entire romantic life for someone else. And his new business? "How's that going?" asked Marcus, our creative director. You said he was launching something. It's totally insane, but in the best way, Delaney glowed. He's building this boutique consultancy from scratch, Stone Vale Advisory, specializing in corporate asset restructuring. I stopped breathing. The name was a punch to the gut. Stone Vale. He'd used a fake last name and attached it to the name of my new employer. Actually, she went on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, I probably shouldn't mention this, but Stone Vale is about to sign a massive strategic partnership with us, with Astor Vale Urban Systems. He's going to be leading a huge integration project with our infrastructure team. The room began to spin. A second shockwave hit, harder than the first. My husband wasn't just cheating with my new desk mate. He wasn't just buying condos under an alias. He was forging a high-level corporate alliance with the very company I now worked for. The breathtaking audacity of it all was paralyzing. This wasn't just an affair, it was a hostile takeover of my entire life. I arranged my face into a mask of pleasant interest. I leaned forward, cupping my chin in my hands. That is incredible, I said, my voice unnervingly steady, radiating a warmth that felt like poison. It really sounds like you two have something special. How on earth did you meet a guy like that? Delaney's expression softened into a well-rehearsed glow. She had told this story before, many times. It was 3 years ago, this fall, she started, at this huge development summit in Chicago. I was fumbling with a huge stack of flyers in the hotel lobby, and I dropped everything. Everett was just passing by, but he stopped, knelt down right there in his perfect suit, and helped me pick them up. We talked for 3 hours over coffee. He seemed so reserved, so private. But by the end of that weekend, he said he'd never felt a connection like that before in his life. He said I was the first person who made him want to open up. Chicago. 3 years ago. The memory surfaced, violent and sharp. I had packed his bag for that trip. I'd even bought him a new travel steamer. I remembered kissing him goodbye at the curb, telling him to go kill it at the conference. While I was at home paying our bills, he was on his knees in a hotel lobby, weaving a fantasy for a 20-something girl, telling her she held the key to his soul. The check arrived in a leather folder. The team did the quick math for a 20% tip, tossing down corporate credit cards. Lunch was finished. My real orientation was just getting started. The wind cut sharp as we walked back toward the glass tower of the Astor Vale headquarters. The others were a few paces ahead, arguing about a new coffee place. Delaney slowed her pace to match mine. Hey, Aurora, she said, her voice soft with a hint of apology. I realize it's your first day, and you're probably swamped with new hire paperwork. It's no problem at all, I said, my gaze locked on the revolving doors ahead. What's up? Everett has this huge presentation for Stone Vale next week, she said, her eyes wide and guileless. It's the final pitch to our board for the partnership. He's got a draft of the comms deck, and he's just agonizing over the messaging. Since you're the new reputation director with all that crisis PR background, I was wondering if you'd take an unofficial peek, just to see if the tone lands right? I stopped walking and turned to her on the crowded sidewalk. She was handing me the architectural plans for her fiancé's entire operation, tied up in a neat little bow of professional courtesy. She thought she was just asking a new coworker for a small favor. She was actually handing a loaded gun to his wife. A slow, chilling smile found its way to my lips. It was the first honest expression I had worn all day. Delaney, I said, my voice like polished steel, I would be absolutely thrilled to take a look at his work. The lock on our South End brownstone turned just after 6 p.m. The apartment was precisely as I'd left it that morning. The linen throw was folded perfectly over the arm of the sofa. The ceramic catch-all by the door held our keys and his stack of dry cleaning tickets. For 7 years, this place had been my refuge, a quiet haven I thought was built on a bedrock of trust and a shared past. Now the air was thick, stale, like a sealed tomb. It was no longer a home. It was a scene of the crime. And I was the chief investigator. I didn't fall to the floor. I didn't scream. I calmly removed my coat, hung it on its designated hook, and set my purse on the bench. The complete and total absence of hysterics inside me was its own kind of terror. I was operating on cold instinct, a ghost moving through the museum of my own life. At 7:15, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. His name flashed on the screen above a picture I took of him on a beach 2 summers back. I answered, my voice lifting into the cheerful, supportive tone I had spent years perfecting. "Hey, you," I murmured, my hip pressed against the cold marble of the island. "Hi, babe," Everett's voice answered back, enveloped in the distinct hushed quiet of a premium car. "Look, I am incredibly sorry, but tonight's a wash. A critical client dinner just popped onto the schedule. We are in the final stages of a major deal, and there is no way I can pull out." "Of course," I replied, my voice perfectly smooth. "Business is business, I get it. Don't even think about it. I'll just have a salad and catch up on my reading." "You're a saint. I'll be as quiet as I can when I get home. Love you." "Love you more," I said, and the line went dead. A client dinner. The same excuse I had accepted without question on countless other nights. I turned and walked back toward the living room where his cashmere coat was slung over the armchair he favored, a casual remnant from the prior evening's chill. My movements were precise, almost surgical, as I slipped my hand into the silk-lined interior. In the right pocket, my fingers found the sharp corner of a small, stiff card. I drew it into the light of the standing lamp. It was a valet stub dated exactly 4 days prior. The name, scripted in elegant cursive across the top, was Blackwell House, the exclusive waterfront estate, the wedding venue. Here it was, the tangible, irrefutable confirmation that the fantasy my deskmate was spinning was actively being planned with my husband's money. My eyes traced the dark print until the letters burned into my vision. I then placed the ticket back into the pocket, carefully smoothing the wool so it appeared utterly untouched. I moved to the charging hub by the kitchen and picked up our shared tablet, the one we used for grocery lists, bill alerts, and scheduling his mother's appointments. After unlocking it, I opened the synchronized calendar. For years, my only interest in this app was to note the colored blocks indicating his business trips. This time, I absorbed every word. The entire blueprint of his betrayal was there, laid out in meticulously color-coded entries, scheduled right alongside his actual work commitments and routine checkups. I saw recurring appointments cryptically marked DB, scheduled for every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 until 9 p.m., and consuming entire Sunday afternoons. My mind raced, cross-referencing these dates with his sudden golf games and impromptu weekend strategy sessions. As I scrolled forward, the entries became bolder, blending his secret life with his professional one. I found a 2-hour block designated SV Showcase Rehearsal. A few days after that, another event was marked Escrow Signing at a downtown law office, and glaring at me from the end of the coming week was an entry that simply said, "Launch dinner." The sheer administrative banality of it all made my stomach turn. This was not a clandestine affair, it was a hostile corporate merger of his 2 lives, using our shared calendar to manage the demolition of our marriage. At 11, I heard the lock turn. I was on the sofa, a book open in my lap, illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp beside me. Everett entered, bringing with him the scent of expensive whiskey, the crispness of the fall night, and the faintest trace of a floral perfume I now recognized as belonging to the woman who believed she was building a future with him. He kicked off his polished Italian loafers and loosened his tie, releasing a long, dramatic sigh. "God, I'm glad you're up," he said, crossing the room to me. He bent down, his lips pressing a familiar, lingering kiss onto my hair. The intimacy of that gesture sent a jolt down my spine, a violent tremor I forced my body to conceal. He went to the kitchen, and the sound of the water dispenser filling his glass was deafening in the silence. "How was dinner?" I asked, turning a page I hadn't read. "Excruciating," he called out, returning with a glass of water for me before sinking into the cushion next to me. We spent hours haggling over percentage points, but forget my day. How was your first day at the new firm? Does the Seaport office meet the hype? His hand came to rest on my shoulder, his fingers gently tracing the fabric of my shirt. It was the gesture of a doting husband, a masterclass in deception. It was surprisingly seamless, I said, meeting his gaze. The team is incredibly supportive. I think it's going to be a great fit. I knew it would be, he smiled, his expression a mask of pure, unadulterated pride. He sipped his water, letting a comfortable quiet settle between us. Then, his voice changed, shedding its domestic warmth for a sharper, more strategic edge. "Did they get you started on anything major?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "I'm sure a senior director role means diving straight into their confidential strategy briefs. Have they given you the files for the upcoming joint venture yet?" The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, suffocating. His question was delivered with the polished ease of a husband making small talk, yet its timing was too perfect, too aligned with the merger Delaney had gushed about at lunch. A chilling understanding washed over me, dragging me into an abyss. My being hired by Astor Vale Urban Systems was no accident. The headhunter who had pursued me for 2 months with an almost unbelievable offer hadn't discovered my profile by chance. This was Everett's design. He needed his wife on the inside, managing the public image of the company he was secretly planning to merge his own fraudulent enterprise with. He had installed me as his ultimate safety net, his unwitting corporate accomplice. "Not yet," I answered, my voice a calm, even melody. "Tomorrow is all compliance and HR onboarding. The real strategy work probably won't start until later in the week." "Well, don't let it be too much," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "You're going to do amazing things there." An hour later, I lay awake in the absolute black of our bedroom. Beside me, Everett slept, his breathing deep and even. He looked entirely at peace, like a man who believed he had successfully bent the world to his will. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the darkness press down on me. I was sharing a bed with a con artist who had weaponized my career for his own financial scheme. The urge to wake him, to throw that valet stub in his face and scream until the police arrived, was immense. But that would only end our marriage. In the suffocating quiet, I knew I wanted more than a dramatic exit. Before I brought his world down, I needed to see the whole board. I closed my eyes, sinking my breaths to his as the cold, precise gears in my mind began to turn. The early morning light that crept through our curtains was thin and gray. It was just past 6 a.m. I remained perfectly still, listening as the shower hissed to life, followed by the quiet, familiar sounds of Everett preparing for his day. He came into the room, leaned down to kiss my forehead, and whispered he'd see me around 7 that evening, explaining he had a grueling day of negotiations ahead. I gave a sleepy, supportive mumble in response. The solid click of the front door plunged the apartment into profound silence. I did not try to sleep again. I slipped out of bed, went to the kitchen, and set my laptop on the cool marble island. I made a single cup of strong black coffee, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands. I typed in the address for our joint bank account. For 7 years of marriage, my interactions with this site had been perfunctory at best. I'd log on, check the overall balance, verify the mortgage had been paid, and log off. I had trusted him with the intricacies of our finances. Today, I ignored the summary page. I went straight to the account tools and exported the complete transaction records for the last 24 months into a single, raw data file. At a glance, the spreadsheet painted a picture of a perfectly normal, upper-middle-class urban life. Line after line documented our shared existence. Monthly condo fees, alarmingly high grocery bills from the market downstairs, the city water payments, the electric bills, the automatic deductions for our retirement funds. It was the predictable, stable pulse of a shared life. But as I scrolled deeper into our financial history, past the domestic minutiae, the rhythm shattered. An outbound wire transfer from the second Tuesday of October of last year seized my attention. $15,000. The transaction was a clean, sharp line item sent to an entity called SB Consulting, LLC. I leaned in, my focus narrowing on the screen. Everett was a consultant, yes, but his legitimate work ran through meticulously kept business accounts, never this shared well of our personal savings. Another transfer appeared 2 weeks later on a Thursday for $22,000. Then a bleed of $30,000 in late November. Each payment was a quiet hemorrhage into the same opaque company. In a new encrypted tab, I navigated to the Massachusetts Corporate Registry. I keyed the firm's name into the database search. The results loaded instantly. The registered agent wasn't Everett Sloan. The business address pointed to a residential building in Somerville. I copied the street address and fed it into a deep dive property and record search. The system populated a list of tenants from the last 5 years. The current leaseholder's name appeared in bold: Samuel Brooks. The warmth in my stomach turned to ice. Brooks. Delaney Brooks. Not 24 hours ago, she'd casually mentioned a brother, a freelance brand designer. The audacity of it, the sheer recklessness, left me hollow. This wasn't just about financing a mistress. He was laundering our shared assets through a shell company registered to her brother. My fingers moved with cold precision, isolating every transaction outside our normal household costs. I flagged the wires to her brother's firm. Another pattern emerged: recurring payments to a vendor named DB Creative Solutions. I filtered the data to the last 12 months. I selected the column of fraudulent wires and initiated the auto-sum function. The result materialized at the bottom: $186,000. I forgot to breathe. The digits blurred into a meaningless stain on the screen. It was not an error. It was the liquidation of our marital property, the money I earned, our future, drained away to construct his secret life. And that number only represented the documented transfers. It didn't account for the cash withdrawals or the flawless emerald-cut diamond Delaney flashed at me. It didn't include the 5-star dinners, the luxury hotels, the endless bouquets of flowers I never received. I kept scrolling, my detachment clinical, like a surgeon examining a terminal case. Then I found it. A single wire dated exactly 3 weeks ago for $85,000. The recipient was a high-end escrow firm in the financial district. The memo line was a cryptic alphanumeric code, but the attached brokerage was the developer for the Charleston Wharf residences, the very same luxury waterfront condos Delaney had described as the place she and her fiancé were buying. My husband was using our joint savings for the down payment on a multi-million-dollar home with another woman. I closed the banking portal and opened a new encrypted file on my private drive. I titled it with the current year. I began building a spreadsheet, the blueprint for his absolute ruin. I designed 5 columns: date, amount, recipient, the Brooks connection, and the final crucial one, the alibi. I picked up our synced family tablet and cross-referenced every stolen dollar with the corresponding lie Everett told me. September 4th, $12,000 wired to the Brooks Shell Company. The family calendar showed his entry: brutal merger mediation staying at a hotel downtown. I entered the lie. November 17th, $30,000. His calendar for that weekend read, Partners Wellness Retreat, no cell service. I documented the excuse. I typed every entry, line by line, dollar by dollar, lie by lie. With each keystroke, the crushing weight of being a victim began to dissipate. The pain of imagining his hands on her, his lips on hers, was being replaced by a colder, sharper clarity. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a methodical financial assault. He was gutting my life, my work, and my security to build a custom world for a woman a decade younger. He had transformed our marriage certificate into a personal, unsecured line of credit for his affair. I straightened my posture, my spine rigid. The morning light now filled the immaculate kitchen I had maintained as the backdrop for our life together. I looked at the perfectly ordered rows of data. The numbers didn't cry. The dates didn't rage. The wire transfers didn't beg for forgiveness. They were just facts, hard, immutable, and lethal. As I logged the 40th transaction, something inside me shifted fundamentally. I was no longer Aurora Hill, the loving, discarded wife. That person was gone. I was now the chief auditor of a complex marital and corporate fraud. I was the lead investigator of the demolition of my own life. I saved the file, engaged the encryption, and shut the laptop. In the bathroom, I splashed my face with icy water and applied my makeup with the focus of a soldier preparing for war. I had a mission. I had to drive to the Astor Vale office, sit beside the woman wearing a ring purchased with my money, and act as if my world hadn't stopped turning. But as I walked to the door, I knew the truth. The world had stopped. I had stopped it. And now I was going to take it apart. At exactly 10:30 a.m., an email notification broke my concentration. A message from Delaney Brooks flagged as high importance. The subject, Stoneville Advisory Draft, confidential. I glanced toward her desk. She caught my eye and gave me a brilliant, thankful smile, mouthing "thank you," before turning back to her call. I opened the file. A 45-page deck filled my screen. The cover slide was a masterclass in corporate design, featuring the sleek logo for Stoneville Advisory. I scrolled to the executive summary, my eyes skimming the text until they landed on the second sentence. I froze. I read it again. I moved to the next paragraph, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. The slide was titled Market Trust Recovery Architecture. The points detailed a specific, phased approach to managing corporate crisis during a hostile takeover. The phrasing, the unique terminology, the very syntax of the risk assessment framework. It was all devastatingly familiar. It was mine. A wave of cold sickness washed through me. This wasn't just a similar strategy. It was a direct copy of a proprietary deck I wrote 2 years ago. That project was canceled by the client at the last minute. The work was never published, never circulated beyond my own encrypted drive. Only one other person on Earth had ever seen it. The memory surfaced with a sickening, vivid clarity. It was a late Tuesday night in January. I was at the kitchen island, working past 2 in the morning, my eyes burning. Everett came in, poured me a glass of wine, and stood behind me. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders as he quietly read over my work on the screen. I remember he called the framework brilliant, asking detailed questions about the trust metrics. He hadn't been admiring his wife's mind. He was conducting corporate espionage in our kitchen. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was intellectual. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd used my own intellect as the blueprint for his counterfeit consulting firm. My knuckles turned white gripping the mouse, my gaze fixed as I raced to the document's end. I had to witness the full scale of his hubris on page 42. I found it. The final slide labeled Prospective Strategic Integration. Centered on the screen was the stark green and gray logo of Astor Vale Urban Systems. Underneath, a pristine bulleted list detailed a proposed growth strategy, outlining how Stonevale Advisory would manage the public relations crisis from Astor Vale's impending acquisitions. The scheme materialized in my mind, its brutal logic gleaming under the office lights. I rose, mechanically smoothing my skirt, and walked with purpose down the hall to the corner office. I just needed to be sure. I gave the assistant a tight nod and tapped on the open glass door. Roland Pike, the CCO and my new boss, glanced up from his monitors. He was a veteran of corporate battles, now sipping black tea. "Aurora," he greeted, pointing toward a leather guest chair. "Welcome aboard. Have the onboarding videos bored you to tears yet?" "Not quite," I answered, sitting and crossing my legs with rehearsed composure. "The transition has been remarkably seamless, actually. I need to thank you again for this role, Roland. I'm aware the hiring process was unusually swift." Roland gave a low laugh, relaxing into his chair. "We don't hesitate when we see a perfect fit, and between us, your resume did most of the talking for you. That, and we got a significant recommendation from an outside source." I angled my head, affecting a look of polite, intrigued surprise. "An outside source? I figured the recruiters just fed my resume into the system." "Oh, the recruiters found you, absolutely," Roland affirmed, his voice lowering into a confidential tone. But we had a trusted external consultant advising on vendor partnerships. He saw our shortlist for this position and essentially insisted we bring you on. He claimed your unique skills in crisis management were precisely what we'd need for the third quarter. I'm honored. I kept my tone breezy, though the air in my chest had turned to ice. Did this consultant say how he knew of my work? I think he worked with your old agency, Roland said, his attention already drifting back to his screen. He's a sharp operator with a boutique firm we're vetting, extremely discreet. You'll likely run into him at next week's investor gala. I'll look forward to it, I said quietly, rising from my seat. Thank you, Roland. As I walked from his office, the polished corridor felt like a closing trap, each piece of the sickening puzzle clicking loudly into place. Everett's strategy was a masterclass in sociopathic design. He knew about my recent professional instability, having watched me endure a toxic work environment for 18 months. He knew I was searching for an escape. To legitimize his paper-thin company with a major Astorvale contract, he understood he needed an asset inside. He required someone senior in the communications wing who would never question his stolen methodologies or his doctored financials. He needed a firewall. And what better firewall than his devoted, utterly oblivious wife? He had engineered my hiring from the outside. He had seated me directly at the epicenter of the explosion he was creating. When the Stone Vale deal inevitably came under fire, the company's new reputation director, Aurora Hill, would be its chief defender, unknowingly shielding her husband's affair and his criminal enterprise. My professional rescue was just a tool to weaponize my own integrity. I returned to my desk. Delaney was still on her call, happily finalizing catering arrangements for the gala. She glanced at me, pointing with a grin toward my screen, obviously waiting for praise on her fiancé's masterwork. She believed she was asking a colleague for a simple review. She had no idea she had just delivered a complete confession of intellectual property theft and calculated market fraud directly into my hands. I lowered myself into my chair, my hands flat against the cold desk. The searing pain of betrayal was gone, replaced by the chilling, focused clarity of a coming war. Everett had placed me on the board, assuming I would be his silent, compliant piece. It was a fatal miscalculation. My goal was no longer about catching him in a lie. From this moment, my sole purpose was the systematic destruction of his company, the severing of his partnerships, and the total public annihilation of his professional and private life. I opened Delaney's email and clicked reply. "The presentation is flawless," I typed, each keystroke a sharp, deliberate strike. "I wouldn't alter a single thing. I am eager to watch him deliver this." I pressed send, shut the window, and began designing my execution. Tessa Wren slid her untouched drink across the dark wood of the speakeasy table. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, 24 hours after I'd uncovered the stolen strategies. Tessa was a mercilessly sharp litigator who specialized in high-stakes corporate fraud and asset recovery. We'd been college roommates, and she was the only human I trusted with the poison I was now carrying. I had just spent 40 minutes mapping out every detail of Everett's labyrinthine betrayal. I spoke in a calm, steady voice that felt alien to the wreckage of my life. Tessa offered no hollow words of comfort. She simply watched me with the icy, analytical stare of a strategist planning a war. "Tears are temporary. Aurora," Tessa began, her voice a low, pragmatic rasp, "and anger fades. The only thing that fuels a successful takedown is concrete evidence. He's funneling significant capital through shell accounts to bloat a company that's about to partner with a massive infrastructure corporation. This isn't about infidelity anymore. This is calculated, systemic fraud," she said, tapping the table. "If you scream at him tonight, he'll know the walls are down. He'll scrub everything, move the money, and you'll fight for scraps in court for the next 5 years. You have to become invisible. You copy everything. You back it all up, and you hide it so deep he'll never find it." Following her precise guidance, I returned to our quiet apartment and dedicated 4 hours to a careful digital extraction. I avoided our home Wi-Fi, using a secure cellular connection for my laptop. I copied every bank record, every corporate filing for his shell entity, and his entire calendar history. I saved the recruiting emails from the firm that had so aggressively pursued me for the Astor Vale position. I duplicated everything onto 3 separate encrypted hardware drives. I concealed one in the lining of an old coat, placed the second in a locked drawer at my new office, and delivered the third into Tessa's hands the next day. I was fortifying my position, but I still needed a confederate inside the company walls. At 2 p.m. on Thursday, I left my department and walked through the glass-lined halls toward internal audit. I was looking for Naomi Price, Astor Vale's senior manager of internal compliance. Naomi was a brilliant, no-nonsense professional with a reputation for having absolutely no patience for financial shortcuts or creative accounting. I tapped on her open door. She looked up from a complex spreadsheet, nudging her glasses up her nose. "Naomi, I'm Aurora Hill, the new Senior Reputation Director." I began with a controlled, professional smile. "I know how swamped you must be, but I was hoping to open a direct line to your team. I find it's best to identify potential PR fires before they start. The audit department always sees the first signs of smoke." Naomi studied me for a long, silent beat. In her world, communications and audit only ever spoke when a crisis was already underway. I saw her doubt give way to a flicker of professional acknowledgement. She motioned to the chair opposite her. "Have a seat, Aurora," Naomi said, clicking a remote that quietly shut her office door. It is a rare thing, a communications director who prefers hard data to a good story. I have been staring at a potential fire for a week now. I settled into the chair, my heart rate quickening just slightly. Do I need to get a statement ready? Naomi sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. I am not sure yet. We are finalizing a contract with an external firm for a major partnership, a boutique outfit named Stone Vale Advisory. They are slated to handle the public relations for the harbor acquisitions. Hearing his fictional company's name in this cold, professional context sent a jolt of ice through my system. I kept my face a perfect blank, offering a nod for her to continue. I found 3 separate and deeply questionable invoices from them during the initial review, Naomi went on, her voice strained with annoyance. Their financial structure is nonsensical for a firm of their supposed scale. I kicked the file back to the executive floor and requested a full liquidity audit. They sent it right back, telling me to stand down. It is a high-priority, fast-tracked initiative. Whenever the top floor tells you to stand down, that is your cue to dig harder, I remarked evenly. Naomi gave me a grim, appreciative smile. My thoughts exactly. So I started digging. I went looking for their financial guarantees to see how they were backing their cash flow. She angled her monitor so I could see it. They took out a substantial short-term commercial loan just 30 days ago. It is a smokescreen, designed to make their books look solid just before they sign with us. But the collateral for that loan is not company stock. It is a piece of residential real estate, a high-value brownstone in the South End. My breath hitched. Our South End brownstone. Our home. Because it is a marital property, Naomi said, narrating the demolition of my life without a clue. The borrower would have needed a signed spousal consent form to leverage the property for a business loan. Naomi opened a scanned document on her screen. The title was Spousal Guarantee of Commercial Credit. I saw the legal text describing the precise address of the house I loved, the house I slept in every night. I looked down to the bottom of the form. There, in crisp digital ink, was my name, Aurora Hill, next to a perfect rendering of my own signature. The air in the room became thin and sharp. The low hum of the servers turned into a piercing ring in my ears, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This was not just about Everett draining our savings to set his mistress up in a condo. It was not just about him stealing my professional work. He had forged my name, using my home as collateral for a fraudulent loan, all to win a contract with the very company I now worked for. This had escalated far beyond infidelity. This was a serious prosecutable crime. Naomi, I said, my voice barely a whisper, the composure I had held onto for days finally cracking. I leaned in, my finger trembling as I pointed to the screen. That is my signature. That is my home. And I swear to you, on my life, I have never seen this document before. Naomi froze. Her eyes shot from the monitor to my face as the horrifying truth of it all settled in. She did not ask if I was certain or if I might have signed it without thinking. She saw the absolute conviction in my eyes and knew instantly that she was face to face with the victim of an elaborate fraud. "My God," Naomi breathed, her hands hovering over her keyboard. "Aurora, if that signature is forged, the entire loan is fraudulent. The partnership is radioactive." "I need the metadata," I said, my voice hardening, the shock instantly converting into cold, clear strategy. "I need to prove I did not authorize that signature." Without a word, Naomi bypassed the document viewer and went straight into the system's back-end security logs. Her fingers flew, pulling up the audit trail for that specific file. Green text scrolled down the screen until she pinpointed the exact moment of execution. "Here," Naomi said, highlighting a string of code. "The signature was added on the 14th of last month at 2 in the morning. I have the IP address and the device ID." My mind snapped back instantly. On the 14th, I was in a hotel in Seattle for a crisis management conference for my old job. I had the flight itinerary, the hotel bill, and the event credentials to prove I was 3,000 miles away. The IP address Naomi found was from the router in our living room. The device ID belonged to Everett's desktop computer. He had waited until I was on the other side of the country, then sat in our home and signed my future away. Naomi silently copied the entire metadata log, encrypted it onto a clean flash drive, and slid it across the desk toward me. We sat there in the silent office, the air heavy with the sheer scale of what we knew. My hand closed around the cool plastic of the drive. I could see the entire game laid out. One misstep, one premature word, and Everett would liquidate the funds, erase the trail, and leave me legally destroyed by his debt. But if I navigated this perfectly, if I let him take that stage believing he was king, he would lose more than his wife. He would lose his company, his name, and his freedom. The rest of the week was a surreal performance of professional courtesies while I silently gathered my weapons. My mind was a fortified command center, but my reality was tethered to the unsuspecting, vibrant woman working just a few feet from me. After my meeting with Naomi, Delaney Brooks somehow grew even friendlier. She would stop by my desk on her breaks with an iced matcha, asking my thoughts on minor emails. In her eyes, I was not an obstacle or a rival. I was the accomplished senior director she wanted to be, a steadying presence for her boundless optimism. One rainy Thursday, the office felt especially hushed. The gray harbor light made long shadows on our desks. Delaney swiveled in her chair to face me, her expression open and almost vulnerable. We were talking about career paths, but as usual, every conversation with her orbited back to the single, massive star in her universe. Him. "I used to be so afraid of settling down before I met Everett," she admitted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt alien in the corporate quiet. "He is older, and he has a past, I know, but he was so brutally honest with me from day one. He said he had been unbelievably lonely for years." I let my fingers rest on my keyboard, my face arranged into a look of gentle empathy. The words were like tiny, sharp blows, their cruelty lying not in their truth, but in how masterfully they had been constructed. "He told you he was lonely?" I asked, my voice impossibly smooth, as in living by himself? Delaney nodded, her eyes bright with the fierce belief of a woman convinced she had healed a wounded man. He said his past felt like walking through a series of empty houses. He told me there was still some old paperwork to sort out, legal things from a life he had already left behind in his head. But he promised none of that was real, that I was the only real thing he had felt in a decade. Old paperwork to sort out. That was my husband's summary of our 7-year marriage. It was the category he assigned to our vows, our home, our holidays, and the financial security I had spent my youth helping to build. To him, I was no longer a wife. I was a loose end, a clerical task to be completed before he could fully delete me from the record. "It takes real strength to trust someone with that much history," I murmured, forcing down the urge to slam my mug into the wall. "It does," Delaney agreed, her voice soft. "But he made it so easy, especially right before the proposal. I was up for a huge job, a regional director position in Denver. It was a life-changing salary. It would have made my career." She glanced at her ring finger, twisting the platinum band. But I turned it down. I said no because Everett told me he could not build his empire in Boston without me right here. He once told me I was his true north. You don't abandon the man who looks at you like you are the only fixed point in his spinning world. But in that moment, the acid burn of animosity I'd felt for the woman at the next desk simply neutralized. The rage that had clawed at my throat when I first saw her photo was replaced by the vast, quiet emptiness of a shared tragedy. Delaney Brooks was no predator. She wasn't some calculating schemer who had targeted my marriage and my assets. She was just another woman who had gambled her entire life on a game that was already fixed. She had walked away from a solid, promising career in Denver to tie her future to a man constructed entirely of charisma and lies. She genuinely thought the ring on her finger belonged to a burgeoning billionaire, unaware the diamond was bought with funds siphoned from my retirement account. She had no idea the business loan underwriting her dreams was secured with my signature, expertly forged. We weren't competitors. We were two captives in the same invisible cage. Both of us charmed into compliance by the very same fraud. "You gave up a great deal for him," I said, my voice low, steeped in a genuine sympathy she mistook for admiration. "He was worth it," she replied, her face lighting up with that familiar incandescence. "On that note, I have a fashion emergency. The showcase for the investors is next Friday. The whole C-suite will be there, every major venture capitalist in the city. Everett says it's the night everything changes for us." Her eyes were gleaming. I'm stuck between this stunning white sheath dress and a midnight blue gown that flows to the floor. Which one says I'm his rock, but I'm also a force of nature? A turning point. Everett had no concept of how true his words were about to become. "The blue," I said instantly. "White is too on the nose for a corporate function. It reads like you're walking down an aisle. Midnight blue holds its own space. It's the color that makes the whole room turn when the spotlights hit." "Midnight blue it is," she chirped, clapping her hands softly. "Aurora, you are an absolute genius." I swiveled back to my computer, its pale light a cool mask on my face. The objective of my endgame had just been clarified. I no longer had any desire to ruin Delaney. Inflicting pain on her would be a waste of energy. The unvarnished truth was already on a collision course with her reality. My new mission was to engineer a stage where she would witness Everett's true nature, in high definition, at the exact same time as his entire professional world. She deserved a ringside seat to his implosion, not as collateral, but as the primary witness. That night, the air in our South End brownstone was heavy with a carefully curated illusion of domestic peace. Everett came home early, a crisp paper bag from a gourmet market in one hand. He moved through the kitchen with the practiced ease of a man who fully expected reality to rearrange itself to his liking. I sat at the kitchen island marking up a draft of a press release, tracking his movements through my peripheral vision. He hummed something low and off-key while he twisted the cork from a bottle of Barolo, pouring a heavy measure into my glass. "You've had a hell of a week," Everett murmured, sliding the glass across the cool marble toward me. He came around the island to stand behind me, his hand settling on the back of my neck, his thumb stroking my skin in a familiar, hypnotic pattern. "I know this transition to Astor Vale has been a grind. I was thinking we should get away this weekend. Just us. Ditch the phones, get a corner table at that new French bistro, and just find our way back to each other. How does that sound, babe?" The sheer, magnificent audacity of the performance nearly stole my breath. This man had embezzled my inheritance, falsified my name on a business loan, and was days away from a gala he'd promised his other fiancée would be the start of their future. Yet here he was in our kitchen, caressing my neck and pitching a romantic weekend to reconnect. His deception wasn't a frantic scramble. It was a comfortable, well-worn coat. It was second nature. I raised the glass and took a deliberate sip of the dark, heavy wine. I let the bitter tannins flood my senses, using the sensation to anchor myself, to keep the tsunami of my rage from breaking the surface. "A quiet dinner sounds perfect, Everett," I said, leaning back into his touch just enough to sell the lie. "But I really have to be on my game for this investor showcase next week. Roland put me in charge of the brand strategy segment, and I need to nail the messaging for the new partnerships." Everett's smile was wide and authentic, crinkling the skin around his hazel eyes. In his mind, he was looking at his hard-working, loyal wife, who was diligently polishing the final pieces of his crowning achievement. "You're going to kill it," he whispered, his lips brushing my temple. "They're so lucky to have you on this." "Oh, I think everyone is about to get precisely what they've earned," I replied softly, my gaze fixed on my own reflection in the dark window. He walked back to the stove, perfectly content. I sat frozen at the island, the wine glass chilling my hand. It became terrifyingly clear that the only strategy in a war with a narcissist is to starve them of their fuel, emotional chaos. I could not afford to be the wronged wife. My grief was a vulnerability, my anger a tactical error. I had to become the calmest, most rational person in the room. The stage was being set, the unwitting actors were memorizing their lines, and I was the sole director holding the real script. All I needed to do was wait for the house lights to dim. The pressure was mounting, but it only made my focus sharper. 2 days after my discovery, a secure message lit up my private phone from Naomi Price. She asked for an off-the-record chat in the 9th floor records room, a dead zone for cameras and listening devices. When I got there, Naomi was standing under the cold hum of the fluorescent lights, a slim folder in her hand. Her face was taut, wearing the expression of an auditor who has just watched a rounding error snowball into a corporate avalanche. "He's not just cooking the books on his operating cash," Naomi said, her voice a low echo in the concrete space. "He's invented his revenue streams out of thin air. Stonevale Advisory is hemorrhaging money, afloat only because of that fraudulent line of credit against your brownstone. But I finally know why he's ramming this merger through." She slid the folder open on a metal shelf. It was a confidential bid proposal. "The Harbor District Mobility Authority," Naomi explained, her finger tapping the document. "It's a 9-figure, multi-year city contract to completely rebuild the port's transit grid. Hundreds of millions in public funding. Astor Vale has been chasing this for a year. Everett sold his firm as the key, the one thing we were missing. He claimed he has a proprietary risk assessment model that makes our bid a sure thing." My eyes flew across the dense municipal jargon. His arrogance was almost impressive. He was leveraging my own crisis management frameworks to sell himself as the savior for a massive government project. "If that investor showcase is a success," Naomi went on, her arms crossed tightly, "our board votes on the merger the next morning. Once they sign those papers, Astor Vale officially absorbs his shell company, his debt, his fabricated assets. His entire fiction gets the legitimacy of our corporate seal, and he gets a corner office and an obscene severance package. He's using our company as a laundry for his entire professional identity," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "Precisely," Naomi confirmed. "And once that deal is signed, exposing him triggers a PR nightmare for us. This has to be stopped before that showcase ends." "It will be," I promised, my voice a blade of ice. "I have the trigger. I just need him to stand a little closer to the bomb." Walking back to my desk felt like re-entering a different dimension, the stark reality of Naomi's discovery clashing with the giddy, frantic energy coming from Delaney. She was fluttering around a stack of elegant, cream-colored invitations. "I just got the final seating arrangement," Delaney whispered excitedly, leaning over the low divider between our desks. "Everett put me at the main table, right next to the board members. He said that after his keynote, he's going to bring me up on stage. I paused, my fingers hovering over my keyboard, and looked at her. Her eyes were luminous, shining with the kind of dangerous hope that precedes a devastating fall. "To introduce you as his fiancée?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Even better," she breathed, a conspiratorial smile playing on her lips. "He wants to introduce me as his founding partner, the woman who was there from day one, the true foundation of his entire success." How romantic! He was merging our personal story with his professional apex, a grand public gesture, a testament to his partner. He was set to stand on a brilliant stage, funded with my savings, secured with my forged name, running on my stolen ideas, and award the triumph to the woman he'd been sleeping with for 3 years. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He genuinely thought he could bend reality to his will just by speaking it into a microphone. That evening, the architect of my demolition tempted fate. Everett and I sat in our living room. He was cradling a scotch, scanning his presentation on a tablet. He looked over at me, his face a flawless mask of a supportive spouse. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice wrapped in the smooth, confident tone he used on high-stakes clients. "I spoke with Roland today about the schedule for Friday. We're bracing for a hostile question-and-answer session from the venture capitalists. Seeing as you are the senior reputation director, I hoped you might draft the crisis response plan for me. You understand the way these investors' minds work. If you build my defensive script, I will be absolutely untouchable up there." He sipped his drink, completely oblivious that he had just handed me the very instrument of his own ruin. He was explicitly asking me to script the most important performance of his entire life. "I would be delighted to draft your responses, Everett," I answered, my voice calm and agreeable. "I will ensure every last vulnerability is uncovered and decisively handled." "You're a true lifesaver," he smiled. He, sinking into the leather sofa and closing his eyes in pure relief. The following morning, the final component of my counteroffensive snapped into position. I logged into my work account and opened the new calendar alert for the Stone Vale Showcase. Roland Pike had locked in the itinerary. I scrolled through the precise schedule. At exactly 7:30 in the evening, the opening address was slated to begin. The name listed next to that pivotal slot was not Roland Pike. It was not the company's chief executive. It was Aurora Hill. Roland had officially delegated the brand keynote to me, the speech meant to warm up the financiers before Everett's grand presentation. I gazed at the monitor, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my lips. This was the difference between a messy, emotional scene and a surgical corporate strike. I was not going to be sneaking in through a side door. I was not going to be the hysterical wife screaming from the back, easily contained by security as a private matter. Everett and Roland had laid out the red carpet for me. They had given me a podium, a microphone, and a captive audience of the most powerful people in the city, along with a protected block of their undivided attention. I was going to climb those stairs, using the exact professional authority my husband thought he could exploit. I left my office on my lunch break and walked 3 blocks to an anonymous meeting room I'd booked. Tessa Wren was already there, her briefcase open, the long mahogany table covered with perfectly organized legal documents. "The trap is laid," Tessa stated, her eyes sharp and utterly devoid of pity. "I have the emergency motions prepared. The instant you pull the trigger on that stage, I will electronically file emergency injunctions with both Family Court and the Commercial Fraud Division. The asset freeze motions are ready to go. The data preservation orders are aimed at Astor Vale and all his fraudulent entities." She pushed a thick, stapled document across the table. "If he attempts to move a single cent from any account after Friday night, it will trip an automatic federal banking wire alert," Tessa explained, tapping the paper. "If he tries to delete the forged spousal consent form, our preservation order makes it felony destruction of evidence. We have him trapped from every possible angle." I laid my hand flat on the stack of legal papers. They felt heavy, solid, and intensely real. They were the absolute opposite of the fantasy world Everett had constructed. "He thinks Friday is his coronation," I said, looking at my oldest friend. "Let him put on the crown," Tessa retorted, her mouth twisting into a merciless smile. "It just makes the decapitation more of a spectacle." I walked back toward the seaport, the coastal gusts whipping my hair across my face. I was no longer the widow of a dead marriage. I was no longer waiting for the universe to deliver justice or for the opportune moment to fall into my lap. I had carefully stacked the firewood, poured the gasoline, and bolted every single exit. I was engineering the moment. All that was left was to strike the match and watch his theater of lies burn to the ground. It was Thursday night, 24 hours before the event. I sat in the dark of my home office staring at my encrypted laptop. The digital case file was finished. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting and legal exposure, all compiled into a single, lethal master file. I opened a secure email portal. In the recipient field, I entered 4 specific addresses. The first went to Tessa Wren. The second was for Naomi Price. The third was the direct inbox of Astor Vale's Audit Committee Chair, a man famous for his zero-tolerance policy on corporate malfeasance. The fourth address was for the senior managing partner of Astor Vale's outside legal team. The subject was stripped of all emotion. It simply stated, "Urgent notice of fraudulent vendor integration and impending fiduciary breach." In the email's body, I wrote only 3 sentences. The attached encrypted archives contain irrefutable proof of financial fabrication, intellectual property theft, and felony mortgage fraud by the founder of Stone Vale Advisory. Executing a term sheet with this firm will immediately subject Astor Vale Urban Systems to catastrophic federal and civil liabilities. I would strongly suggest your physical attendance at the investor event tomorrow evening to witness the complete disclosure of these material facts. I hit send. There was no sound effect, no dramatic flair, just a tiny digital whisper, and the guillotine was locked in position over my husband's neck. But digital records could be explained away, delayed, or conveniently missed by an assistant. I needed something heavy and undeniable in their hands. I took a large box from under my desk. Inside were 5 thick, black leather portfolios I'd had printed by a boutique firm in the next town. Each binder held 72 pages of high-resolution, hard-copy evidence. I ran my thumb over the crisp paper. Here was the full narrative of his deception. The bank records with every single stolen dollar from our joint accounts traced in harsh yellow highlighter. The state registration papers proving his vendor shell company was owned by his mistress's brother. The raw metadata logs certified by auditors proving our home was leveraged as collateral from his own computer while I was 3,000 miles away. And at the end, the side-by-side visual evidence of my stolen strategy decks demonstrating that his entire intellectual framework was a lie. I closed the heavy binders. The truth now had a physical weight. It could not be erased. Later that evening, Everett got back to the brownstone. The moment he stepped inside, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. He did not go straight to his study to practice his pitch as he always did. Instead, he just lingered in the kitchen while I poured myself some sparkling water. He was disturbingly attentive. He moved in close behind me, circling my waist with his arms, his chin resting on my shoulder. His breathing was tight and shallow. He quizzed me about my day, the office climate, my precise schedule for tomorrow. His voice was coated in a strange, manufactured tenderness, but his frame was tense. He was a hunter who had sensed a subtle shift in the air. He knew, on some animal level, that his environment had become too placid, too agreeable. He was scanning my face for any sign of a crack, a glimmer of knowledge, a hint of the unstable wife he was prepared for me to become if I ever found out. I gave him nothing. I leaned back against him, letting my head rest on his chest. I told him I was just mentally walking through my opening remarks for the presentation. I told him I wanted tomorrow night to be absolutely perfect for him. He let out a long, shaky sigh, pressing a kiss to the side of my neck. He accepted the lie because it was the only version of reality his colossal ego could permit. He went upstairs to shower, completely assured he was still the master of his domain. The next morning, the energy in the Astor Vale office was crackling. Delaney Brooks was nearly buzzing in her chair. She had shown up an hour early, her hair in perfect loose curls, her fingernails painted a flawless neutral shade. She leaned over the short partition between us, her eyes shining with a frantic and childlike excitement. "I can't breathe, Aurora," Delaney murmured, her eyes darting around our shared office space to ensure privacy. "Everett called me on his drive in. He said the venue is breathtaking, but that's not even the best part." I paused my work, turning to face her with a carefully constructed mask of friendly interest. "What's the best part?" A radiant, devastating joy bloomed across her face as she bit her lip. "He said if the board gives their unofficial approval tonight, he's going to ask for the mic during the reception. He's going to share some profound personal news with everyone." My fingers went numb above the keys. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his scheme suddenly snapped into focus. This wasn't just about landing a landmark corporate deal. He was planning to leverage the Astor Vale Investor Showcase into a public engagement announcement. He would stand before the directors, the financiers, and Boston's elite, weaving his professional triumph into his personal fraud. He was going to launch his new life, built directly upon the wreckage of our marriage. And he intended to do it with his wife of 7 years, sitting in the audience. "That's incredibly bold," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign and distant. "A public announcement on that scale, it's going to be a night no one will ever forget." "I know," she whispered, her hands pressed to her cheeks in excitement. "I'm wearing the midnight blue dress, the one you helped me pick. I have to look perfect for when he calls me up." I offered her a serene smile, giving no hint of the truth. I didn't let an ounce of the inferno raging behind my eyes show. I required Everett to follow this disastrous path he'd laid for himself. I needed him standing at the very brink, utterly certain of his victory, right before I sent him over the edge. At 3 p.m., I left the office, citing a need to finalize my presentation notes. I took a car to a sleek, minimalist salon on Newberry Street. I wasn't there to enhance my beauty or to outshine a younger woman in a blue gown. I was there to put on my armor. I had the stylist craft my hair into a severe architectural knot at the base of my neck, with no soft pieces to frame my face. When the artist was done, my face was a pale, sharp mask of intent, defined only by a deep, unforgiving crimson lipstick. I went to the dressing room and put on the garment I'd selected for this evening's execution. A floor-length, tailored black crepe gown. It had a high, asymmetric neckline and powerfully structured shoulders that screamed authority. There was no glitter, no lace, nothing that suggested celebration. It was the attire of a woman arriving to conduct a clinical public dissection. I met my own eyes in the mirror. I wasn't a woman scorned. I was a consequence. By 6 in the evening, the sun had vanished behind the harbor, stretching long, dark fingers across the city. I stood in the silence of our apartment foyer. Everett had left hours before for a final tech rehearsal. My hand reached for the glossy VIP credential on the entryway table. I looped the lanyard around my neck, the cool plastic settling against my skin like a medal of war. My phone lit up, displaying the evening's schedule in crisp, clean font. His fraudulent company's name stared back at me, Stonevale Advisory. I dropped the phone into my clutch, grasped the thick portfolio containing the unvarnished truth, and walked out. Tomorrow was irrelevant. Tonight, the two separate lives he had so carefully constructed were about to collide with violent, irreparable force. The main ballroom at the Mariner Crescent Hotel was a monument to modern corporate power. Geometric chandeliers rained cold, brilliant light upon a sea of venture capitalists, board members, and influential media figures. I waited in the wings, perfectly hidden by the thick, velvet stage curtains. Through a small opening, I watched the man who had destroyed my world holding court. Everett was impeccable in a custom charcoal suit, a glass of expensive whiskey held casually in his hand. And there, Beside him, utterly unaware she was standing in an abattoir, was Delaney Brooks. The midnight blue gown flowed around her just as I'd pictured. She held his arm, her face a perfect image of devotion, certain she was on the verge of a spectacular new life. Precisely at 7:30 p.m., the lights went down. A hush fell over the room. Roland Pike's voice filled the space, introducing the keynote speaker, the senior director who would outline the vision for Astorvale Urban Systems. I emerged from the shadows and walked into the searing white light of the stage. My black dress drank the light, a slash of darkness in the glittering hall. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who already owned the room. As I reached the podium, my eyes found my husband's in the front row. The change in Everett's expression was a masterpiece of destruction. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a raw, animal panic. All the color drained from his face. He staggered back a half step, his hand shaking so badly that the ice rattled in his glass. Beside him, Delaney just looked confused. She cocked her head, her mind clearly struggling to understand why her quiet new coworker was now commanding the stage at her fiancé's moment of triumph. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," I said, my voice perfectly clear and steady. "We are here tonight to map the future of urban infrastructure. We are here to discuss vision, trust, and the critical importance of our strategic partnerships. Astorvale Urban Systems is built on a foundation of absolute integrity, and because that integrity is our most valuable asset, I have a duty to inform this board that before we proceed, this room must understand the truth about the man at the center of this proposal." I didn't pause for an objection. I didn't glance at Everett. I pressed the small remote in my hand. The massive screen behind me changed. The Stonevale Advisory logo disappeared, replaced by a high-resolution image of a Massachusetts marriage certificate. "The man you know as Everett Stone," I announced, my voice filling every corner of the ballroom, "is legally Everett Sloan, and he has been my husband for the last 7 years." A collective gasp went through the room. Delaney flinched back as if struck, her hands flying to her face as her eyes shot from the giant screen to the ghost-white man beside her. I clicked the remote again. A detailed financial statement filled the screen. "Over the past 24 months," I continued, my tone as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, "Everett has systematically embezzled over $186,000 from our joint accounts. He used this capital to fund a shell corporation registered in the name of Samuel Brooks, the brother of the woman standing next to him, a woman who was subsequently made a shareholder in a company funded entirely with our stolen marital assets." A wave of angry murmurs swept the room. Phones came out. Board members leaned forward, their expressions hardening from confusion to cold fury. I clicked the remote a third time. The forged loan document appeared, my signature circled in red. "His crimes didn't end with theft," I said, raising my voice over the growing chaos. "To secure the bridge loan for the Harbor District contract, Everett forged my digital signature, illegally using our home as collateral while I was on business 3,000 miles away." "Kill the mic!" Everett finally shrieked, his voice a raw, broken thing. He scrambled for the stage, but 2 large security guards stepped from the shadows, blocking his way. "This is a private dispute," Everett yelled, pleading with the Astorvale executives. "This is a domestic issue. She's unhinged." "It stopped being a private matter the moment you brought your fraud into this boardroom, Everett," I replied, my voice cutting through the noise. "When you steal marital funds for a business, forge signatures to secure credit, and use your wife's professional standing to legitimize your hostile takeover, you elevate simple adultery into complex, prosecutable corporate crime." Before another falsehood could form on his lips, the ballroom's grand doors swung inward. Our lead counsel entered, flanked by Naomi Price and the head of the audit committee. The charade was officially over. The chairman's voice resonated with cold fury, his eyes locked on Everett. "Audit has confirmed the metadata on all forged collateral," he announced. Astor Vale is terminating all dealings with Stone Vale Advisory, effective now. His entire world dismantled in moments. The 9-figure acquisition, the city contracts, the lavish exit package, all vaporized. But the final blade wasn't wielded by the board. It was from the woman in the midnight blue dress. Delaney trembled, her constructed reality turning to dust as she stared at our marriage license on the screen. The fantasy fractured, and the devastating truth of her role in his con crashed down. She realized the man she loved was a ghost. She didn't weep. She simply reached into her clutch, retrieved her phone, and walked directly to the legal counsel. "I have the emails," Delaney's voice, though unsteady, carried across the front rows. "Every text, every timeline, every promise about our marriage and the promotions. I'm handing over everything." It was the final perfect strike, delivered by the very woman he'd built his lies to obtain. Everett seemed to shrink inside his custom suit. He stood alone in a room of titans, stripped of his fraudulent name, his stolen wealth, and his hollow prestige. I didn't remain to see security escort him away. I had already conducted the autopsy. My work was done. I turned from the wreckage, descended the far staircase, and pushed into the cool, silent hotel corridor, leaving the muffled chaos behind me. Waiting by the elevators, bathed in a soft golden light, was Tessa Wren. She held a thick legal envelope. A fierce, victorious smile spread across her face as I approached. "The emergency injunctions are active," Tessa stated, passing me the documents. "His accounts are frozen, the servers are being preserved, and the divorce petition is filed, citing gross financial fraud." I took the envelope. It felt impossibly light. I walked out into the crisp Boston night, the coastal wind a clean slate. I wasn't leaving as a discarded wife. I was leaving as the sole architect of his downfall, the only one with the lethal patience to see it through to the end. The foundation of his deception had crumbled, and I was stepping over the ruins into a future that was finally my own. Thank you for following my story. Please share in the comments where you are watching from, and do not forget to subscribe to the Violet Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can reach others who need to hear it.